You ever sit there staring at your phone, watching the minutes turn into hours, the hours into days, and still nothing? No call, no text, nothing. And you start wondering, did they forget me? Did they not care? But let me tell you something most people don't realize. Silence is a decision. It's not an accident. It's not a mistake. It's a choice. And sometimes the loudest message is the one that comes with no words at all. You see, when someone cares about you, truly, deeply values you, silence isn't an option for them. They don't go missing in action. They don't vanish when things get uncomfortable or quiet when you need clarity. Because care shows up. It calls. It checks in. It explains. But when someone disappears without warning, when they leave you hanging in a storm of confusion, what they're really saying is, you're not a priority. And that's a hard truth to swallow, but it's one you need to digest if you ever want to stop waiting on people who already made their decision. We've been taught to overthink everything. Maybe they're busy. Maybe their phone's dead. Maybe they just need time. But at some point, you got to stop making excuses for the silence and start listening to what it's actually saying. Silence says, I'm not ready for you. Silence says, you gave more than I was willing to match. Silence says, you deserve better. But I'm not going to say it. I'm going to show it by staying gone. It's painful. Of course it is. Because when you've given your energy, your time, your heart, you expect something back. A response, a gesture, at least an explanation. But life doesn't always give us that. People walk away without warning. They retreat without closure. And you're left holding the weight of questions they'll never answer. That's when you have to realize their silence isn't your punishment. It's their reveal. They just showed you everything you needed to know about where you stand in their life. But here's the deeper truth. When someone goes silent on you, they're not just making a choice about you. They're revealing something about them. Their silence reflects their immaturity, their inability to communicate, their discomfort with accountability. Don't take their silence as a reflection of your worth. Take it as a revelation of their character. And the biggest mistake you can make is chasing after that silence, begging it to speak. Because you weren't made to beg for basic things like clarity, respect, or love. You weren't made to chase people who had the option to reach out and chose not to. You were made to recognize the truth, face it head on, and grow from it. Silence can be a sanctuary or it can be a storm, depending on how you use it. When it's handed to you, don't run from it. Sit in it. Learn from it. Let it echo back to you everything you refused to hear when the noise was too loud. Because in that silence, you'll find the strength to stop waiting, to stop wondering, and most importantly, to stop giving energy to people who chose to stay quiet instead of showing up. The moment you stop questioning why they haven't called, why they haven't texted, and start asking why you're still checking is the moment you begin to reclaim your peace. Because silence may be their message, but your response is the real power. And when you learn to let silence be the answer, you'll stop needing closure from people who already closed the door behind them. You keep checking your phone, nothing. You stare at the screen like it owes you an explanation. Still, no message. But what you don't realize is that no message is a message, loud and clear. It's the kind of message that doesn't come with punctuation or emojis, doesn't need to be typed or spoken. It's delivered in silence. And if you're wise enough to hear it, it'll change the way you value your time, your love, and your peace. We live in a world where people are always too busy, but let's be honest. No one is too busy to respond to what matters to them. People make time for what they care about. They respond to what they value. So when someone doesn't call you, doesn't text you, doesn't check in on you, stop pretending like it's nothing. Stop lying to yourself saying maybe they forgot. They didn't forget. They made a decision. Their silence is communication, just in a different form. The hard part is you were raised to believe that love speaks, that care shows up, and that distance means something is wrong. And that's true. But here's the twist. The most dangerous kind of rejection is the silent one, because it leaves you room to make up stories. You start giving them excuses they never earned. Maybe they're hurting too. Maybe they're waiting for me. Maybe they don't know what to say. No, maybe they're just done and they chose not to say it. And that's what silence does. It forces you to listen, not with your ears, but with your soul. It's a test, not just of your patience, but of your self-respect. Are you going to wait on someone who has already decided not to show up? Or are you going to hear the message hidden in that silence and start walking in the other direction? Sometimes we crave noise because it makes us feel like we're still connected. But silence is brutal because it tells the truth without comfort. It doesn't let you pretend. It doesn't sugarcoat. It just stands there, unbothered and honest. You can't spin silence. You can't twist it into hope. You either accept what it's saying or you keep hurting yourself by ignoring it. And what is it really saying? It's saying, I'm not coming back. It's saying this connection doesn't matter enough for me to keep it alive. And if they won't say that to your face, then let their silence speak it into your healing. You see, your healing starts when you stop expecting closure from people who walked away silently. You stop needing words to move on. You stop needing validation to understand your worth. You stop needing them to care in order for you to care about you. Because here's what's real. The right people don't go silent on you. They don't disappear. They don't watch you hurt from a distance while pretending they're thinking about it. The right people are clear. They speak, they show up. So if someone chooses silence, believe them. And don't just hear their silence, respond to it. Not with desperation, not with more messages, but with stillness of your own. Match their silence, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Because the minute you understand that no message is a message, is the minute you stop needing them to speak in order for you to move on. It's strange how someone can be such a big part of your life, and then, just like that, silence. No arguments, no closure, just nothing. At first, you don't believe it. You keep checking, hoping, thinking maybe they just need space. Maybe they'll come back. Maybe the silence is temporary. But the truth that hits hardest and frees you the most is this. When someone chooses silence, they're making a decision without having the courage to say it out loud. And deep down, you already know that. That ache in your chest, that weight in your stomach, that's not just confusion. It's your intuition. It's your spirit trying to get your attention, trying to tell you something your heart doesn't want to hear. And what it's saying is this: when someone stops talking to you, when they stop reaching out, they're telling you that you are no longer a priority. And that's tough, because when you love someone, you expect them to care back. You expect them to fight, to show up, to speak, even if it's uncomfortable. But when they go quiet, when the calls stop, the texts vanish, and the conversation dies, that's not confusion. That's communication. That's a silent declaration. It's their way of saying, I've moved on, without having to face the weight of your emotions. But here's where you take your power back. You don't chase the ones who go silent. You don't keep writing chapters in someone's story when they've already closed the book. Your peace begins when you stop begging for clarity and start accepting reality. Because when someone chooses silence, they also choose to forfeit the right to your energy. See, your energy is sacred. Your presence, your attention, your loyalty, those aren't things to be given away lightly. So if someone can disappear without explanation without care, without a single word, that says everything you need to know. Their silence is not a mystery to solve. It's a message to understand. And once you understand it, you don't need to ask why. Why did they stop talking? Why did they leave? Why didn't they care? The answer is all around you, in the silence itself. They didn't stay. That's all the answer you'll ever need. And you don't need to fill the silence with questions anymore. You fill it with self-respect. You fill it with strength. You fill it with peace. You fill it with your own voice rising from the quiet, saying, I'm not waiting anymore. There comes a moment when you stop asking why they went silent. You stop replaying every word, every message, every memory, trying to pinpoint the exact moment it all shifted. Because no matter how many times you go over it, it won't change the outcome. What will change everything, though, is when you shift your attention from what they stopped doing. Silence from someone you cared about is painful. It's confusing. It feels like abandonment without a goodbye. But if you look closer, silence isn't just absence. It's a mirror. It reflects everything you need to heal. Their silence highlights how much noise you were willing to tolerate. It shows you how long you were willing to hold on to someone who let go a long time ago. And it forces you to confront a truth most people avoid. When someone is quiet, they're giving you space. In that space, it's your opportunity to grow. But most people misuse that space. They fill it with panic, with overthinking, with stories they invent just to feel close to someone who's already emotionally gone. You start to wonder if you did something wrong, if maybe your love wasn't enough. But here's the truth. Someone who values you never goes quiet, and someone who does go quiet doesn't deserve your loud loyalty. This is where your transformation begins. You don't chase silence. You don't try to speak louder just to fill the void they created. You listen, you observe, and then you choose. You choose to no longer respond to the version of them that only exists in your mind. You choose to see their silence not as rejection, but as redirection. Back to yourself, back to your strength, back to your path. When people stop showing up for you, it's not your job to drag them back. It's your responsibility to honor yourself enough to stop waiting. Stop waiting for closure. Stop waiting for explanation. Stop waiting for them to realize what they lost. If they cared, they'd speak. If they valued you, they'd call. Silence isn't an accident. It's an intentional choice. So now you have a choice too. You can either keep checking your phone, hoping they'll break the silence, or you can break the cycle. You can choose peace over chaos. You can choose self-respect over confusion. You can choose growth over guessing games. Because the moment you realize their silence is a message, and that message is they're not choosing you, is the moment you stop choosing them too. And that's when the healing begins. Sometimes the most powerful answers don't come in the form of words. They come in the form of silence. You see, when someone stops calling, when the texts stop coming, when there's no explanation and just distance, that silence is speaking louder than any apology ever could. It's saying everything they don't have the courage to say out loud. And if you're not careful, you'll spend weeks, even months, trying to decode it when the truth is already there. People who suddenly go silent often do it because they know what they did. They don't reach out not because they're confused, but because they're avoiding the reality of their actions. They stay quiet not because they don't care, but because they do. And that care comes with guilt. But rather than owning that guilt, they hide. Rather than facing the consequences, they retreat. And what that really means is this: they don't want to be held accountable for the damage they caused. Silence becomes their shield, their way of pretending nothing happened. But let's be honest, you don't deserve someone who disappears when things get uncomfortable. You don't need a person who only shows up when it's convenient. Because the kind of love that grows you, the kind of connection that heals you, it doesn't vanish when you're vulnerable. It doesn't ghost you when things get real. It stays. It communicates. It faces the hard conversations. So when they stay silent, it's not your responsibility to break that silence. It's not your job to fix what they broke and carry the weight of both your emotions. That's the kind of emotional labor that drains you. It robs you of your joy, your confidence, your clarity. And the longer you wait for them to speak, the more you lose your own voice in the process. Silence is an answer, and sometimes it's the most honest one you'll ever get. You don't need to beg for clarity from someone who chose to disappear. You don't need to wait for closure from someone who was never open in the first place. Because real love doesn't leave you guessing. It doesn't play hide and seek with your heart. It doesn't make you question your worth just because they couldn't face theirs. So stop checking your phone. Stop refreshing your messages. Stop rereading old conversations like they hold the key to understanding what went wrong. They already showed you what you needed to know in the loudest way possible by saying nothing. And now you choose peace. You choose forward. You choose you. There's something about silence that teaches you what noise never could. It humbles you. It reveals things about people, about relationships, and most importantly, about yourself. When someone goes silent on you, especially someone you gave your time, your energy, maybe even your heart to, that silence doesn't just sting. It leaves an echo. It forces you to sit with questions you never thought you'd have to ask. And that's where the real growth begins. Not when they come back, but when you stop waiting for them to. Because silence, as painful as it is, doesn't just show you who they are, it shows you where you placed your value. Were you giving your loyalty to someone who only saw you as an option? Were you investing in a relationship that was never truly invested in you? Sometimes we keep pouring ourselves into people because we want to prove our worth. We want them to finally see us, finally choose us. But silence tells you something deeper. It tells you they saw your worth, they just didn't know how to handle it. That's hard to accept, because when you care, you assume other people care the same way. You believe the connection you felt was mutual, and when it's not, when they vanish without explanation, it feels personal. But here's the truth. Their silence has more to do with them than it ever did with you. Maybe they weren't emotionally mature enough to hold space for real love. Maybe they were battling their own demons. Or maybe, and this is the hardest one, maybe they just didn't care enough. But no matter the reason, the outcome is still the same. They didn't show up. And now, it's your turn to show up. Not for them, for you. This is the moment where you reclaim your power. You stop checking your phone, not because you don't care, but because you care more about your peace. You stop replaying conversations, not because they didn't matter, but because you matter more. You stop waiting for someone who went silent to give you answers they're not brave enough to deliver. Because when someone chooses silence, they also choose distance. And in that space they created, you're allowed to rise. You're allowed to grow. You're allowed to say, I don't need to be chosen by someone else to choose myself. So if they're quiet, let them be. If they're distant, don't chase. If they're not reaching out, don't reach back. The people who love you, they won't confuse you. They won't ignore you. They won't leave you questioning your own value. And if someone's silence is louder than your peace, it's time to stop listening to them and start listening to your own strength. There comes a moment when you finally realize the silence wasn't meant to break you. It was meant to build you. You stop asking, why haven't they reached out? And start asking, why was I holding on so tightly to someone who let go so easily? That's a powerful shift. Because when they stay silent, when they go missing without explanation, when the messages dry up and the calls stop, what they're really saying is, you're not my priority. And that truth, as painful as it is, becomes the very thing that sets you free. You see, people think closure comes from conversations, from final texts, from last phone calls where both sides explain everything. But real closure comes when you no longer need that. When you look at their silence, and instead of hearing confusion, you hear clarity. Because someone who can go silent while you're still hurting, someone who can stay distant when you're loyal, someone who can watch your heart break without blinking, they've already answered everything you were waiting to hear. They told you exactly who they are by not saying anything at all. And that's not cold, that's not heartless, that's just the reality of people who aren't meant to walk with you into your next season. Some people are not silent because they forgot you. They're silent because they never fully saw you. And that's a level of rejection that feels personal, but it's not. It's a reflection of their capacity, not yours. This is when you learn to protect your peace, to stop opening your soul to people who only bring confusion. You start realizing that just because you miss someone doesn't mean you need them back. That just because there was a connection doesn't mean there's still a purpose. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is not respond to that silence with desperation, but with dignity. You don't beg someone to make space for you in their life. You don't chase someone who already walked away. And you sure don't shrink just to make them comfortable. You grow, you stretch, you get still, not bitter, and you let their silence be the final word. Because you've got better things to do than decode someone's avoidance. You've got healing to do, dreams to build, people to love who will actually love you back. And maybe one day they'll realize what they lost. Maybe they'll feel the weight of their silence and wish they had done things differently. But by then you'll be too far gone, too healed, too whole, and you won't be waiting anymore. Because you'll finally understand that their silence wasn't the ending, it was your beginning. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't just hurt, it teaches. And the lesson you start learning when someone stays quiet for too long is this. People don't always leave loudly. Sometimes they slip away silently. No drama, no explanations, no grand goodbye, just space, just distance. Just quiet. And while that silence can feel like a slap in the face at first, over time, it becomes your greatest wake-up call. You start realizing that silence is not always about peace. Sometimes it's about avoidance, about fear, about immaturity, about someone not having the emotional capacity to face what they broke. And instead of standing in the storm with you, they vanish, hoping time will erase the mess, hoping their quiet exit will hurt less than a truth spoken aloud. But you feel it, don't you? You feel every second of that unanswered text, every echo of the call that didn't return. Silence is not soft. Silence screams. And what it's saying is, I'm not willing to deal with the damage I caused. And the longer they stay silent, the more you see it for what it really is. Not an accident, not a mistake, but a decision. A deliberate act of emotional distance. And that's where your growth begins. Because you stop interpreting their silence as a reflection of your worth, and you start seeing it as a reflection of their lack of courage. It's not that you were too much. It's that they were never ready. Not for the depths, not for the honesty, not for the realness you brought to the table. And here's where the shift happens. You no longer fill in the blanks for them. You stop overthinking, stop assuming, stop hoping. You learn to live with the unanswered. You learn to breathe without closure. You start to understand that their silence is not your burden to carry. It's their choice, and it's their loss. Because anyone who could disappear without clarity was never strong enough to love you with consistency. So, you start turning inward. You stop trying to reach out into an empty space and you start reaching deeper into yourself. You find your own peace, not in the noise of someone returning, but in the quiet strength of standing alone. You realize that healing isn't loud, growth isn't flashy. Sometimes the most powerful transformation comes in silence, in the stillness of letting go, in the calm decision to stop chasing someone who already made their exit. And one day, you'll look back at that silence not with bitterness, but with gratitude, because it taught you how to protect your heart. It taught you how to rise without explanation. And most of all, it showed you that the one who stays silent doesn't hold the final word, you do. Sometimes the silence says everything you need to know. You sit there staring at your phone, checking the time, checking your messages again and again, wondering if maybe they're busy, maybe they forgot, maybe something came up. But deep down, there's a part of you that knows they're not calling, not because they can't, but because they won't. And that stings, because now it's not about what was said, it's about what wasn't. And what isn't being said tells you more than any words ever could. That silence starts to weigh on you. You carry it around in your chest, in your thoughts, in your routine. You try to push it away, distract yourself, justify it, but it always comes back because you're not confused. You're hurt. You're realizing that someone who once had so much to say now chooses to say nothing. And that choice, it cuts deeper than any argument, any goodbye, any closure. Because silence isn't neutral. It's a message. It's a signal. It's the sound of someone backing away while hoping you won't notice. And here's the truth you eventually come to accept. People know how to reach you when they want to. No one forgets the person they care about. No one misplaces someone they value. When you matter, you're not a second thought, you're a priority. So when someone chooses silence, what they're really choosing is absence. And that's not a reflection of you, that's a reflection of them. Their avoidance, their discomfort, their unwillingness to show up. You begin to realize that the silence wasn't just about them pulling away. It was about you being invited without words to grow, to rise, to see things clearly. Silence is often the final reveal. The mask falls off, and what you see is someone who didn't have the capacity to love you in the way you needed. Because someone who can go days, weeks, even months without reaching out is someone who has already made their decision. Whether they admit it or not, whether they sugarcoat it or not, the silence is the decision. So you start making decisions of your own. You stop checking the phone. You stop rewriting reality in your head. You stop giving space to someone who's filled yours with uncertainty. And you begin to fill that silence, not with more waiting, but with purpose, with energy, with healing. You begin to remember who you are when you're not wrapped in someone else's hesitation. You take back your peace. You reclaim your voice. Because the truth is, someone else's silence does not get to define your story. You define it by how you respond, by what you choose to tolerate, and by how fiercely you love yourself when others forget how to. And then one day, the silence doesn't hurt like it used to. It's still there, but it no longer echoes inside your chest the way it did. You're not checking your phone anymore, not because you've given up, but because you finally let go. You've accepted what you can't control. You've stopped fighting for clarity from someone who was always committed to confusion. You realize you can't chase someone into caring. You can't beg someone to be consistent. You can't keep bleeding emotionally for someone who won't even hand you a bandage. The healing doesn't always look like a loud breakthrough. Sometimes it's quiet, it's subtle. It's in the moment you stop reacting to the silence and you start responding to yourself. You pour into your own cup. You start doing the things you put off while you were waiting. You invest in yourself, your mind, your body, your future, because you finally see that silence wasn't a punishment. It was a pause. And in that pause, you found your power. You begin to understand that closure doesn't come from another person's apology or explanation. It comes from your own acceptance. You may never know why they stopped calling, why they vanished, why the connection faded without warning, but you know enough. You know that someone who values you doesn't disappear when it's inconvenient. They don't go silent when things get hard. They show up. They speak up. They stand beside you not just when it's easy, but when it's uncomfortable too. So you stop romanticizing the silence. You stop imagining that maybe, just maybe, they're thinking about you and just don't know how to reach out. No, grown people know how to communicate. They just choose not to. And that choice is loud, even in its quietness. That silence was the message. It told you everything you needed to hear, even when not a single word was spoken. And the most beautiful part, you didn't break. You grew. You rose. You didn't let the silence define your worth. You used it to rediscover it. You took the pain and turned it into wisdom. You took the distance and turned it into direction. And now, you're not waiting anymore. Not for the call, not for the text, not for the explanation, because you already answered the most important message of all. You are enough, even when they're silent.